Please join me in prayer. Holy Spirit, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts and the actions that we undertake in the world all be acceptable to you and in line with the way that we are called to grow and flourish and bear fruit. Amen. I feel like a couple of you were laughing during the reading from 1 Corinthians, and I was too. I focus more on 1 Corinthians for the children's sermon. I'll be looking more at Matthew for the grown-up sermon. But I think that in this one you can really see Paul pacing back and forth in a jail cell, reciting a letter to someone who's just writing it down. Because he's like, thank goodness I never baptized any of you. Well, maybe this one, and there's the other one too, but aside from that, I can't remember. Anyway, and he just kind of goes on with his rant, and it's so, like, you can really picture someone, having that letter and not having an editor, and just kind of sending it. But we're picking up on a story, a moment in the story of Jesus, and this is kind of a crisis for Jesus, because the inciting incident in our story this morning is that John the Baptist has been arrested. And so imagine this is your first time hearing the gospel story. A lot of what you know about Jesus is he has a long lineage behind him. He had a very special birth. And then he was baptized by John the Baptist, so he's kind of a follower of John the Baptist, or in that school of thought. And then John the Baptist is arrested, and that's not going to be good, because as I said last time, when you're arrested in the ancient world, it isn't to spend time in jail. Like, it's to be exiled or disfigured or enslaved or killed. Those are the punishments available to you. So if he's been arrested, it's going to be one of those things unless he's acquitted, found innocent. And so Jesus takes this as a time to relocate. He's going to go elsewhere because there might be just too much heat on people associated with John the Baptist, and Jesus isn't ready for that yet. And so he moves and he goes to the town of Capernaum. This is an anglicization of the name Kafar Nahum, which either means Nahum's village or the village of comfort. So picture like a comfortable seaside town, right? On the edge of the Sea of Galilee, which is it's actually a freshwater. It's not technically a sea, it's a lake. It's actually freshwater. And for trivia night, it is the lowest freshwater on Earth. It's like 200 meters below sea level. So it is the lowest freshwater on the entire planet, is the Sea of Galilee. There's actually still fantastic fishing there. I looked it up. You can go to the Sea of Galilee, and they have fishing tours. There are hundreds of species of fish you can catch, especially since they're taking better care of the lake in the past couple decades. And so it's teeming with fish. There's a village right there. And so as you're imagining Capernaum, imagine a huge fishing industry, lots of fishers. And so there's this issue with people who fish. Like, so fisherman rolls off the tongue, right? Fisherwoman sounds weird. It just clunks when I say it. But there isn't a good gender neutral fisher term, so I'm just going to try to normalize fisher. They're fishers. So there are many fishers on the Sea of Galilee, and we actually have no idea from the text why Jesus went straight to Peter and Andrew and then James and John. Like, there's nothing in the text that tells us they were strapping young men, or they had a history of troublemaking, or they were highly trained in the Torah, or they had public speaking. So, none of that. Jesus is just walking in this crowd of fishers and fishing boats and nets and lines all over the place, and is kind of like, you guys, come with me. And for some reason, they say yes, and they drop their nets and they follow Jesus, which is crazy. They quit their job. They lose their pension. They follow Jesus. And then Jesus goes to James and John, the sons of Zebedee, which I love. Zebedee in Hebrew is thunder. So I love that they're the sons of thunder, which would be like an awesome like heavy metal band name. Like you picture Sons of Thunder like in leather with big beards, like I don't know. That's my image of the Sons of Thunder now. But they're in the boat with their dad. Thunder's right there. And Jesus is like, you guys, come with me. And they jump out of the boat, leaving their dad holding the nets, feeling like an idiot maybe, and they just go follow Jesus. It could be that Jesus tried this with a lot of people, and these are the 4 that said yes. We don't know. He could have been trying to recruit from the fishers, and 4 of them came with him. We don't know. We just know these are the 4 that answered, that said yes. These were the 4 that were caught. They were caught up in Jesus' proverbial net that he cast. So what I want to focus on is this image from this text, this very famous little snippet of text, follow me and I will make you fish for people. How many people have heard this text before? How many people have heard sermons on this text before? Yep, it's going to happen every few years in the lectionary. It's coming up. This is like the classic evangelism text. Like you get this text and you're going to get a sermon about evangelism, which is what you're going to get. Fair warning. But I also know Presbyterians don't like, generally speaking, evangelism. It's one of those things that there's even discomfort right now. Mild, but it's there. I can sense it. It's interesting. And there always is. You're not special. This is every time it comes up. You're not. When it comes up, there's, come on, man. What? Because Presbyterians, I think we generally agree that evangelism should happen. And we have thoughts about how it should happen, perhaps. But when it comes down to it, who would like to join our evangelism team? Hands don't go up. A few will, but not a lot. And it's just in that category of things that everybody thinks somebody else should be doing. You encounter these things in life? Like everyone agrees this should happen. When you ask, okay, who's going to do it? Hands don't go up. Meanwhile, on average, for the past 60 years or so, churches have been shrinking and closing. Like the high watermark for historically for the United States for church attendance was 1968. That was the peak year. That was the most people who had ever been in church on average for as long as we've been keeping numbers on this was 1968. And since 1968, it's been a line that's been falling. And we're not going to turn this trend around now in this room. It's because it's a huge cultural trend. It's hard to even understand why it's happening. It isn't like people stopped doing Christianity in 1969. They didn't forget all the things they knew in 1968. But there's been a diminishing number of people in church since that point. And the line, it wavers sometimes, but over a long time scale, it goes down. And at various times, this causes panic and think pieces and articles and books to be written about why it's happening. And there are a lot of different answers. One of them I found interesting, that I just want to touch on this morning, is that I read an article that made the case that part of the reason why church membership is diminishing is the end of the Cold War. And I thought this is really interesting. So the Cold War was in some ways a culturally unifying thing for the United States. And one of the ways that the Cold War was framed, obviously I wasn't alive for most of the Cold War, but according to this article, one of the ways that the Cold War was framed was it was Christian democracy versus godless communism. And so we did things like we added "In God We Trust" to money, and we added "One Nation Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, which was not there until the Cold War. And so part of the framing of this existential world conflict that defined so many other conflicts in dozens of other countries was this characterization of Christian democracy versus godless communism. And so that was one of the things that was pushing people into church. over the course of the Cold War. Because there's a specter of annihilation hanging over us, and our identity was shared widely and relatively straightforward. We're democratic, we're Christian, we're going to win, right? There's also a lot of things helping churches out in 1968. Stuff was closed on Sunday. There weren't there wasn't a lot else to do. So if your options are sit at home alone or go to church, church is an easier sell than it is right now, where there's 200 exciting things to do and church. There was more of a cultural expectation that you'd go to church. And so I think what was possible with all this institutional and cultural assistance is that as a church, let's say you wanted to found a church somewhere, you could cast a net. And your net would spread over a wide area, and it would grab some of the fish and pull them in. Because there were lots of fish, and they were near the boat, and you could see them. So you could net fish pretty successfully. And if you were busy casting your net periodically, you were going to have a boat full of fish. I imagine if we looked at attendance for this church, I imagine in 1968 it was pretty good. Was anybody there then?
Close to 700.
Right, close to 700 people. And now we're like, oh, cool, we got 90, right? Because I think at the time, you could have a boat full of fish in a more straightforward way. You could net fish, you could cast, and the net would come back, more likely than not, with some fish in it. So since then, we've had the growing number of people who identify as nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, right? Not with habits, but sleeping in on Sunday, nuns. And basically what this means is a person, when you ask them, check the box next to your religious affiliation, they go down the list and they check the box next to none, no affiliation. The majority of nuns believe in God. The majority of nuns still believe in a higher power. The majority of nuns think Jesus is important. The majority of nuns are curious about religion. So it isn't that belief in God is swiftly collapsing. It's more that belief in church, participation in church, is what's swiftly diminishing. And then trailing behind that is diminishing belief in God, but that isn't what's driving the nuns. It's something else. I think part of it is that the specter of annihilation hanging over us is now different. It's not godless communism that's going to do us in, it's climate change. Or it's a mass shooting. There was one yesterday that I'll bring up during the concerns. Or it's a collapsing middle class and the idea that my kids are going to be worse off than I was, and their kids are going to be worse off than they were. And that's kind of the specter, those are the specters hanging over us culturally now. And the church isn't speaking with one voice on those issues. The way that I think it was speaking with one voice on the issue of, are we going to let the godless communists win? That's an easier question than what are we going to do about climate change? How are we going to prevent mass shootings and gun violence? In addition to that, the culture is not going to be any help. As much as we would like to, they're not going to close things on Sunday. They're not going to stop having sports on Sunday. It's just not going to happen. So we have a very different context. And in this context, I think we can't fish with nets. We're going to cast our net, and it's going to come back mostly empty because the fish aren't near the boat. We can't see where they are. Very occasionally, a fish is going to jump into our boat. This happens periodically. Sometimes I watched a video where a mako shark jumped into a fishing boat. It was very dramatic. They weren't fishing for mako sharks, but they're fishing, and this 6-foot mako shark jumps in. Occasionally, a fish is going to jump into our boat, but that's not sustainable. We can't just wait for fish to jump in the boat. That is not a good fisher. That is not a skilled fisher. No one's going to eat fish if they do it that way. And if we cast our net, a lot of times it comes back empty. There's nothing in the net. We're trying to do the things that worked in 1968, and they don't work. because I think net fishing is much more difficult now. So looking at being a fisher, I think that what we need to do is to fish with a line. We need to fish with a lure. We need to fish with bait. Not that we're trying to trick people. We got to bring the fish in with something shiny, something desirable, if that makes sense. I hope I don't torture the metaphor too much, but it's the one I have. So what makes a good, raise your hand if you've been fishing before in your life. So we have a few. So those of you who haven't, you can speculate. What do you think, or what do you know makes a good fisher? Patience. That's on my list. Good, thank you. Patience. Because I wrote out what I think, and we'll see how they match. What else makes a good fisher? Peace? Oh, quiet. Yeah, quiet. Go ahead. Strength. That's a good one. Yeah. You do. You want to be strong to get a big, heavy fish. You don't want to be pulling in minnows. What else makes a good, or what makes a successful fisher? If you're going to go out and catch fish effectively. Good bait and a good lure. Yes. What else? Knowledge. You got to know where the fish are. You got to know what fish like. If you throw out a lure that these fish don't like, you're going to fail, right? Makes sense. What else do you need? One thing I thought of was equipment. You need good equipment to be a successful fisher, like a piece of twine tied to the end of a stick. Right? It's not going to be very effective. And you need opportunity. Go ahead.
How about a net?
A net? We used to use the net. My metaphor is that the net is tougher. Have you ever been net fishing?
Well,
I haven't.
crab.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, well, crabbing is different. Crabbing's a different metaphor. We're going to stick to fish. We're going to stick to fish. Crabbing's a whole other metaphor. Shrimping is different, right? Okay, yeah. Kelp, that's different. We're going with fish. So we have a list. We have strength, patience, quiet, equipment, opportunity, time, bait and a lure. And what did you say, Gary? Knowledge. It was on my list, but I was blanking for a sec. So those are the things that make a good, effective fisher. And those are things we can develop. But we need like a lure. All right. So this is the list, and there are no names on this, so don't squirm. There's probably going to be some repeats as well. So what I ask you to do is to think of something you need that you don't have. What that is an unmet need. Either you don't have any of it or you don't have enough of it, and you need it. So we're going to go through and see what we got. Sleep. Self-compassion. I need more dogs. I only have one. I need more. Same. More hours in the day. Companionship. Empathy and patience. Courage. Self-confidence. Patience. Peace of mind. Faith that everything will turn out okay. Time with family. Courage to speak up when needed. Calm, patience, free time, animal bedding, and milk. LOL. Understanding of others, mental calm. I need money. Not enough. $1 million. Time and companionship. Encouragement. Quiet in my brain. Wisdom for use of time and response to situations. Time and peace. Hearing some themes? Time to read. A blank. Hugs. Love. Patience. Time with my grown kids. A long life with my husband. More life for my dad. A nice place to live in. Patience. As I get older, I find that I need more time. Time. Patience. So I heard some themes there. Perhaps you did as well. Both Desmond Tutu and Mohandas Gandhi said, that for a starving person, God is bread. For a starving person, God is bread. And one of the things I talk about sometimes up here is that salvation is contextual. It isn't the same for everyone. For a drowning person, salvation is air. For a hungry person, salvation is food. For a lonely person, salvation is companionship, and so on. Salvation takes different forms in different situations. You can't offer the same thing to everyone and expect them all to get excited. Because sometimes you offer something to someone that they don't need or they don't know they need. So we need, I think, to keep in mind how we can meet unmet needs. Because these are not the common focus of evangelism programs, right? This is, like, I heard things in here that I haven't heard before when people talk about evangelism and bringing people into the church. And there are some things that I hear about when people talk about that were not in this pile. Now, they might be in other places if I ask other groups, but this is hopefully a good representation of the unmet needs of people in this room, people who have already kind of gotten in the boat, right? We've been caught to one degree or another. So for us to have the right lure, what I think we should focus on is how can we meet the unmet needs, not only of the people in this room, but also the people around us, our neighbors. What are their unmet needs? And where do those unmet needs overlap with things that we're good at as a church, things that we can provide? Because we can't provide everything, but on this list of things, there are a lot of things we can help to provide. So we need patience and equipment and strength and quiet and knowledge and practice and opportunities. But if we focus on meeting one another's unmet needs, and if we focus on figuring out and meeting the unmet needs in the people around us, I think that is a way that we can catch some fish. Amen.